There's heroes and there's legends. Heroes get remembered, but legends never die.
It's the Sitting Sportside podcast, exclusively on 1045theteam.com.
Oh, no! Because there's no crying in baseball. There's no crying in baseball! No crying!
National League West. Welcome into the Sittin Sportside podcast. I'm Eric Hanman, previewing all 6 of your divisions. Second one here, and we're jumping all over the map. We started with the American League Central. That one's already up on youtube.com/team1045. And we're going right to the National League West from there. Perfect logic. But yeah, we're going to start off here talking about the 5th place team, and like I said before at the top of the other one, no crying in baseball. Don't like what you're saying about, if you don't like what I'm saying about your team, don't cry, but you can shoot back at me what you think about your team's prospects. Tweet at me at EricH1045. And the way we do it is I'm going to try to get a fantasy baseball sleeper. I know we're coming up on drafts. I might have missed your draft at this point. Sorry about that. But I'm going to give you some fantasy baseball sleepers. Maybe there's going to be some free agents I'll throw out there that might be available in your league. So one per team, or maybe a couple per team, I'll give you those as well. And we're going to start with the 5th place team in the National League West, which I think is going to be the San Diego Padres. I'm definitely not alone in this one because this Padres team is very, very feeble in what they're going to throw out there. But the good news, if you're a Padres fan, happen to be listening, whether you're in the Capital Region or wherever you may be listening to this podcast, and if you're a Padres fan, welcome in. I'm sorry to tell you this, and if you didn't already know, but your team isn't going to have a great season. It's going to be a miserable year. It's going to be tough to watch sometimes, but it's a beautiful ballpark. We saw it at the World Baseball Classic. A beautiful ballpark, beautiful city. So if you're looking for something to do in San Diego, go see a baseball game. Just know that the product for the home team isn't going to be great. Let's start off with some parts of the negatives here, okay? The San Diego Padres pitching rotation is going to be not very good, and I'll give them some credit. They brought in Jared Weaver, who I think could have an interesting bounce-back type year after really struggling last year with Los Angeles Angels. I'm not saying it's going to be fully healthy, but he could be a little bit more healthy than he was last year and maybe do a decent job. And you have another veteran they brought in, Julie Chassin. They had Clayton Richard come in last year, who came over from the Cubs, who had a good end of last year. So they have some guys who could, and Trevor Cahill's also come in. They're all like journeymen who really aren't going to be anything elite. But there's this kind of this holding out for hope that maybe if they all put it together as savvy vets, then maybe they'd be able to hang in games, and this offense can maybe surprise some people. That's probably the positives, and that's the silver lining, the optimism, if you will. And last thing about this rotation is Luis Perdomo. Could be an interesting guy. He's the upside pick to look at if you're looking at from a fantasy perspective, or if you're looking at from just a future future pitching for this team. Perdomo is a guy that keep your eye on. He could, be the guy who takes them to another level on their pitching, and maybe obviously you have Adrian Espinosa that came over from the Red Sox in the Drew Pomeranz deal last year. So that and another guy who came over from the Red Sox, Manny Margot, that came over in the Craig Kimbrell deal. He probably, and as long as he gets healthy, at some point this year, you're going to see, if he's healthy, 450 at-bats of Manuel Margot, and he and Hunter Renfroe are going to be your saviors if you're a Padres fan, because they're going to be the epitome of optimism for you this year, because Hunter Renfroe has got power. We're not talking about the Clemson wide receiver who came up big in the championship game against Alabama. It's a different Hunter Renfroe, spelled differently, the last name spelled differently, Renfroe. Got it out. He's got power. He was the first person, they had that building out there in left field. The name of the building slipped in my mind, but the first player in just a handful of at-bats last year, was the first player in Padres history, home or away, to hit it over that building. Just an example of how good this young kid's power can be. Manny Margot, more of an average and speedster type guy. So it's kind of the perfect combination, right? Manny Margot, the top of that lineup, who's going to get on base, steal some bases, get in scoring position for a guy like Hunter Renfroe who can drive him in. So there's a lot of positives, I think, from those two guys that are going to give San Diego Padres fans. The rest of it, with the exception of maybe Will Myers, it's going to be interesting it's going to be like, okay, yeah, maybe we can get some positives from elsewhere, like Austin Hedges, who was up 2 years ago and was miserable behind the plate, but now he's going to be the number one guy here now, most likely. Had a very good year in AAA last year in El Paso. So he's got another guy who could be silver lining. And then around the infield, I mentioned Will Myers is going to be a very good option for them. He's young enough to where he could still be a silver lining. He's been around, and we know what he can do. And his talents, I don't want to say wasted, but they could go wasted here. But he could be a nice combination 3-4 with Renfroe, and if Margot and maybe a Solarte at top of that lineup, maybe Solarte down the fifth, or maybe Ryan Shrimp. Travis Janikowski, another speedster in the outfield. So enough about this Padres team. They're not going to get enough really from their pitching staff, in my opinion, to really keep up with the rest of this division. Some positives, but like I said, going to be a miserable season. That bullpen, Carter Capps was a good get by this Padres team. He'll be healthy probably at the beginning of the season. So for the future, as long as they can keep him around, Carter Capps, a good get for that bullpen and the silver lining. The player I would give you on this one are the two that I mentioned in Hunter Renfroe and Manny Margot for your fantasy baseball drafts. They're probably sitting around the 15th to 20th rounds. Maybe people are going a little earlier on Renfroe, but they're going to be guys that I think are going to be available and they can really help you in your fantasy baseball leagues this year. Now for the fourth place team, it gets a little tricky. And the reason why I say it gets a little tricky here is because the rest of this division, I think, are going to be teams that are kind of, I think there's one team maybe bigger that's next level. There's another team that's got the pedigree. That's why I put them above this. So the next two teams I think are really good teams in this division, have a good chance of not only making noise in a wild card race, but maybe even noise in the division. It's just, there's not a guarantee. Obviously, there's nothing guaranteed, but I just don't know if I can put these teams ahead based on past performances and some wild cards, if you will. So we'll start with my fourth place team. And this is looking eerily similar to last year's standings, but right now it's the Arizona Diamondbacks. They trade away Gene Segura, who was arguably their best hitter, at least for average last season. And they still return Paul Goldschmidt. They get a healthy A.J. Pollock and David Peralta back, hopefully for them this year. And that really spirals into what is a good lineup in a hitter's ballpark. It's not quite Colorado, who we'll get to eventually, who's in the same division, but it's still a very good hitter's ballpark. Jake Lamb, who's like ready to break out at third base for them. He had a tremendous stretch last season for them. Hit a career high, home runs with 29 last season with 91 runs batted in. His average suffered a little bit mid-season, but Jake Lamb, a great player for them. And if Yasmani Tomas going to start the season probably off on the disabled list. He has a little oblique strain, but they have a lot more. They bring over Gregor Blanco from the San Francisco Giants for some depth, and Brandon Drury, middle infield, and they have Chris Owings, who they want to put there. Here's the big thing, though, that they got. So, as I said, they lost Gene Segura. They traded for Ketel Marte, who's middle infield depth, but also Tawan Walker, a great young pitcher who hasn't been totally consistent, but his good has been real good. And obviously, there's been some bad. But if he can put it together in the National League, obviously it's going to be changing the ballpark. It's not going to be Seattle where it's more of a pitcher's ballpark. Now you go into more of a hitter's ballpark. But you get that quote-unquote easier out with being able to pitch against a pitcher. So take that for what you will. I think Taijuan Walker is going to be a great number 2 behind Zach Greinke, who I don't think is going to have as bad of a season as he had last year. He can't, really. Same thing with Shelby Miller in that rotation. And Robbie Ray, he put up over 200 strikeouts last year. He was up there in the strikeout race for them last year. And while his ERA was more around 5, which isn't very good, striking out 218 batters last year, that's a positive. So if Robbie Ray can get that ERA down, the extent of that rotation, as long as they get something from Patrick Corbin and Archie Bradley, one or the other, the rotation's good enough to get him there. It's just, can Greinke totally bounce back? Can Shelby Miller totally bounce back? Can Ray lower that ERA? And can Taijuan Walker be consistent? That's where this team gets interesting. I think the offense is going to be completely fine. They're going to do a great job there. But that's where it's going to get interesting, is that can that rotation hold up and really exceed really expectations, or meet what expectations were for a guy like Greinke? And can that bullpen, which is kind of full of starters in a way. You had Randall Delgado, who was a starter before. Now he's coming out of the bullpen. Same with Zach Godley. Can they put it together in the bullpen? We've seen it happen before. Also have a guy like Brandon Maddox, Tom Wilhelmsen out of that bullpen. That's a little shaky area for them, I believe. Fernando Rodney most likely will be their closer. But the bullpen is another shaky part of it. Probably the shakiest part, but like I said, the way they're going to get to the next level of this Diamondbacks team is if those pitchers come out and really exceed expectations, or at least keep them in ball games, because as long as they're in ball games, this offense has what it takes, especially with Paul Goldschmidt and A.J. Pollock, who could be one of the best 3-4 combinations in all baseball. Let's go to the Colorado Rockies that I'm putting in third place. That wasn't much of a... Oh, back real quick to the Diamondbacks before I move on. Brandon Drury, my guy. I think that'd be my sleeper pick. He's more of a... he'll be playing second base this year. He's probably got outfield eligibility as well. So that's a guy that I would really keep my eye on. Brandon Drury at second base for the Arizona Diamondbacks. I'm very, very high on Jake Lamb, though, as well, if you can get him maybe in the 10th or 11th round. If you haven't drafted already. But Brandon Drury, a guy I think could do humans work for the Diamondbacks. Might not be the top of the order, but he was very, very good down the stretch last season. Third place team, like I said, the Colorado Rockies, very similar to the Arizona Diamondbacks in the fact that I think this team has what it takes, especially on the offensive side of the baseball, of the game, to really be a force to be reckoned with this year. But they've gotten injuries to Tom Murphy, who is going to be the better hitting. Who's going to be the better hitter. Him and Tony Walters are competing for the catcher's position. Murphy has a broken right arm, probably not going to start the season healthy. Well, not going to start the season healthy. Ian Desmond, who's the signing, was going to play first base, not going to start the season healthy with a fractured left hand. David Dahl, ribs, out. Young outfielder was probably be their starting left fielder, so they have to fill in with Gerardo Parra and Mark Reynolds in left field and first base, respectively, most likely. And then Tony Walters, who's a great defensive catcher, but it is less of that hitting threat that Tom Murphy was going to be. But they still got DJ LeMahieu. They'll get Trevor Story back from injury, who had a storybook, sorry for the pun, season for half a year last year before he got injured. Nolan Arenado led the league, has led the National League, and I believe the majors as well, in RBIs the last 2 seasons, and also the last 2 seasons had tied for the most home runs as well. So he's been very good in Colorado for the Rockies. Carlos Gonzalez is still there. Charlie Blackmon, one of the better leadoff hitters in all of baseball, looking to steal more bases like he did a couple of years ago. And they have their share. Like I said, they had Gerardo Parra, but also Ramil Tapia. Tapia is going to be a very good reinforcement for the outfield for them. A good young prospect. But really what it gets into what their pitching is going to be. The bullpen has got a little bit of an upgrade with Adam Ottavino being more healthy now and Greg Holland being signed. Jake McGee's also in there. Mike Dunn comes over from the Marlins. So they got a better bullpen than it has been, although it's tough to really pitch in that environment sometimes, especially late in games when the game is on the line. It's also going to come down to that starting pitching staff. Who can live up to expectations? Who can exceed expectations? There are high expectations for me for guys like John Gray and Tyler Anderson, 2 young pitchers who had very good seasons last year and who could continue to improve on what they've already shown as to being very good players, very good pitchers. Now, obviously, when you look at pitching in Colorado, not the ideal place for a pitcher, but I think John Gray and Tyler Anderson are going to be great for them this year. Tyler Chatwood, guaranteed a rotation spot, but then you got the local product from Shaker, Jeff Hoffman in the running, along with Yerman Marquez and a couple others for that rotation in the 4th and 5th. That's where it's going to come dicey, because if they can get something out of Hoffman or Marquez or someone like a Musgrave, that's going to be important for them this season, because that's the Achilles heel for them every year. I mean, they lead in runs almost every year, it seems. So that pitching, like I said, I think John Gray's an ace. I think Tyler Anderson is a solid number 2 starter, but pitching in Colorado, it's hard to really have consistent outings there sometimes, and that's where it's going to be for the Colorado Rockies if their pitching can keep up with the rest of the division. And that's where the Rockies and Diamondbacks stand for me. 2 teams that are going to compete for not only for a wild card position, I think, this year, but also for the division. And I have to give first and second place to either the Dodgers or the Giants. Now I'm going to pick the Dodgers to come in first place again. So we'll talk about the Giants real quick. The fantasy baseball player for the Rockies, it's kind of tough. I think DJ LeMahieu is a little undervalued. Maybe with David Dahl and Ian Desmond's injury, you can get them later. But in the meantime, I guess you would say that Gerardo Parra would be the batter to kind of target in these in a fantasy baseball draft, because of the fact that he's going to probably get a lot of at-bats. And even if Dahl comes back before Ian Desmond, he might get at-bats at first base. Last player I want to mention, I already mentioned Greg Holland. If you need saves, Greg Holland's a good person to target. He'll probably, if he doesn't start the season as a closer, if he doesn't, Adam Ottavino would be the guy to target, just to let you know. But I think he'll eventually take over the closer spot, at least by June, and I think he could be an elite one, even if he's pitching in Colorado. Quickly, let's get to the second place team I picked, and that is the San Francisco Giants. They continue to be a team that just looks really good on paper, and you just hard to doubt them because of how impressive they have been over the years and how impressive their stars are. And by their stars, I mean guys like Madison Bumgarner, starting pitcher, and Buster Posey. They're consistent. They have really good seasons every single year, it seems, and especially when they get to the postseason, they usually perform. Especially Mad Bum, who did struggle against the Cubs, but he pitched them way into that series when they went over the Mets last year. The rest of the team, they really haven't. Their key acquisition this year was Mark Melancon to solidify the back end of that bullpen. What was the problem for them down the stretch last year? Santiago Casilla could not close a game. They could not find someone who could shut down the teams late in the year. So they get Mark Melancon to do that for them. Bumgarner, Cueto, Matt Moore, solid 1, 2, 3. If Samardzija can get back to maybe what he had been a few years ago, that could be a really scary rotation, but he's still a mid-pack starter. Going to be a solid number 4 for them, Samardzija is. The 5th starter, I think, and this is here's a fantasy player to watch, Tyler Beede. I think he will be their 5th starter at the latest, maybe August 1st. But right now, if Matt Cain can stay healthy, he's probably going to get it, and if not, Matt Cain, or if he gets injured, it's going to be Ty Black. I think that'll be an interesting dynamic. But Tyler Beede, mark my words, I think will be a huge part for them in the rotation. Infield looks about the same as it was last year. In case you forgot, the third baseman, former Yankee and former Twin, Eduardo Nunez, most likely going to win that third baseman job over the hero in the postseason last year for the San Francisco Giants in Connor Gillespie. Around the infield, Brandon Crawford, solid defender, keeps getting better as a hitter. Joe Panik, injured last year in a down year, still hit around 250. Brandon Belt, underrated first baseman. Maybe doesn't get in the power numbers as you'd want, but he's still a very good first baseman for them. Tough ballpark to hit home runs. Then again, Barry Bonds did it, right? Hunter Pence in right field, he's been injured as well. And that where you get to their biggest concern, it probably is left field. Because right now, they have Jarrett Parker as their projected starting left fielder. Last season, he got 127 at-bats and only batted around 236. Their other option is Mac Williamson, who had an all-right year last year as well. But it's going to really be up to the main hitters of this league, of this team. Buster Posey, Brandon Belt, Hunter Pence, Joe Panik, Brandon Crawford. Those are like the solid guys that are going to have to make this team go. And maybe they need to get something from Denard Span at the top of that lineup to do it. But I think that the pitching, He's better than the Diamondbacks and Rockies. That's why I kind of have them a little bit higher. But overall, their offense probably falls behind the two aforementioned teams. So if that pitching kind of falters, that gives, I think, an area for the other two teams to jump them. Real quick, a fantasy player from the team, Tyler Beatty. Probably a guy mid-season, a guy to target early in drafts though, or in these drafts, and this could probably get him in the last round. He's Joe Panik. I really like what he can bring to the table this year. Probably batting out of the 2-hole. That's what I'm looking at this year for Bruce Bochy's squad. The most complete team in this division easily is the Los Angeles Dodgers because their offense is stellar in my opinion. It can compete with some of the best of them, and you can't argue with a rotation that is highlighted and led by Clayton Kershaw, the best pitcher hands down in Major League Baseball. Kenta Maeda, probably one of the better second pitchers in the National League in Major League Baseball. So they can get something. Rich Hill, a big guy to come back for that rotation. The rest of that rotation is going to be whether Kazmir can come back from injury, Urias can pitch in the minors for a couple of months, and then get his innings later on in the year and see what they can get from Alex Wood and Brendan McCarthy. But the top three can compete with anybody. Clayton Kershaw, Kenta Maeda, and Rich Hill. Going to be solid rotation. The rest of this offense, though, is super solid, especially if they can get something from Yasiel Puig. They bring over Logan Forsythe from the Rays. That's going to be great. A great acquisition for them. Justin Turner, Corey Seager should be fine by the start of the season. So, and I'm getting played off with that music. And so you know it's time to start wrapping up. But the bullpen as well, they bring in Sergio Romo to solidify the end of that bullpen. And not only does that help them out, but that actually takes away from their arch rivals in the San Francisco Giants. So there is some questions. Andre Ethier in left field, whether he can hold up. I think it might end up being Andrew Toles' position at some point. As they also brought in Franklin Gutierrez. They have Trace Thompson, Klay Thompson's brother, as well as an option. Adrian Gonzalez is an interesting guy to watch real quick because is he going to get those power numbers back? He was down last year in terms of the power categories. He had hit 18 home runs with 90 RBIs, so he still got up there in RBIs, but the 18 home runs are a career, it's not a career low, but it's the lowest number of home runs he's had since 2012, which was his down year. And in that season, he ended up having 108 RBIs. So his average was up around 285. It's about where he's been in his career. He's hit over 300 a couple of times. But that's going to be the big question for me. If Adrian Gonzalez can get his power numbers back over 20 home runs, then this team will really get it going. Yasmani Grandal, great behind the plate. And an interesting thing to watch is Clayton Kershaw's chemistry. We saw it last year behind the plate without A.J. Ellis, but I think he used Carlos Ruiz. So I'm not sure who his catcher is going to be, whether it's going to be Grandal or it's going to be the guy that they have slated there right now, Austin Barnes. But regardless, it'd be interesting to see the chemistry between Kershaw and whoever is his catcher. I don't think it's going to matter, per se, because he's the best pitcher in baseball. A guy to target on this team, it's kind of hard because all these teams are... All these players on the Dodgers, for me, are guys that are kind of high profile, and they're going to be well targeted. Give me, though, Yasmani Grandal is my guy to watch on this team. Catcher, you can get him late, and I still think he's going to put together some good numbers. And now that A.J. Ellis is gone, like I said, he might not automatically get a day off when Clayton Kershaw's pitching. Maybe he'll get a chance to catch Clayton Kershaw, and maybe Dave Roberts will have him in the lineup more, so that could give Grandal a lot more value. And like I said, if Yasiel Puig can bounce back in terms of really get back to the form he was when he came up in 2013, just look out for this offense, and he'd be an interesting guy to look for in a fantasy baseball draft as well. So I appreciate you for listening to this National League West preview. We'll have other previews. The AL Central preview is also up. Keep your eye out for the rest of the division previews. I'm Eric Hanman here on the Sittin Sportside podcast. Thank you for joining us right here on 1045theteam.com. Like I said, check out all the videos of Sittin Sportside podcast, among others, on youtube.com/team1045. We'll see you next time.
Can't wait.